Hello, now we will discuss organizational culture, what it is and how it is related to the topic of influencing. Let me just take you through the objectives. At the end of this video, you will be able to understand what is organizational culture, understand the characteristics of the different organizational antecedents, understand about the impact of organizational culture and one's ability to influence. What is organizational culture? The system of values, assumptions and norms normally shared by organizational members or the employees. It has been shown in the research that organizational culture is manifested by organizational climate, and we all know that if the climate in the organization is conducive for interaction, influencing and getting the work done, it is much more productive. Else we would have to bring about the required change in the organizational culture, and that takes us to the topic of ODN change, and we saw how whenever change is initiated, the defensive behaviors from the members kick in. So just to give you the contribution of organizational culture or its functions to the organization, as we know, the definition is shared system of values, assumption and norms shared with the members. It also helps to convey identity for the organizational members, and it evokes the commitment for a cause, brings about the social system stability which is required for any organizations to become institutions, and works as a regulation mechanism, because we have come to know that wherever their cultures are very strong, there is need for less rules and regulations. So in a way, strong cultures work as a regulation mechanism, and they support farming mindsets and conduct of members in the organization. When we talk about the role of culture, it is believed that the reason or cause of much of the defensive behaviors that one notices in organizations is because of the culture. If the culture is one of openness, one of commitment, it is one of experimentation, one of risk taking, so the coordination between the members increases and the percentage or the incidence of defensive behaviors reduces. But however, we know that organizational culture interacts with individual characteristics, what we call it personality, we discussed in the previous module, and it influences the inclination to recourse to defensive behaviors like avoid action, avoid blame and avoid change that we discussed in the module 2. This tendency in turn reinforces the organizational culture. It feeds into culture again. So organizational factors that act as background for many of the defensive behaviors are there in the organization to impede the performance. Let us just discuss few of them, though they are related to culture, but I am also taking into account the antecedents or the organizational characteristics which are related to structure beside culture. If you look at the characteristics, a strong culture increases behavioral consistency. When it is there, the ability to influence is difficult because they look for conformity, they look for standard procedures and precedences. If you look at the characteristics, high formalization where there are rules and procedures, and that creates predictability and orderliness and consistency. Again, in such organization culture, ability to influence is difficult because they look for conformity, they don't experiment with flexibility, or they are not open to experimentation. The kind of defensive behavior you notice in high formalization cultures is justification to avoid action, over-conforming, passing the buck, play dumb and stalling. And we did discuss in detail the significance or importance of these defensive behaviors in module 2, and in the module 4 we would be approaching the influencing tactics to overcome some of these defensive behavior. When you talk about the bureaucratic rationality where policy, procedure and rules are given primary importance, the defensive behavior you notice is justification to avoid action, and sometimes the members in the organization adopt the defensive behavior of stretching and smoothing, wasting their time, not completing the work even though they have gap in the work schedule which they can fill it with additional work. So when you talk about specialization responsible for specific tasks instead of overall tasks, This results in diffusion of responsibility, and members don't find their work having unique identification or a recognizable portion of the major job. What they do is they resort to defensive behaviors. They pass the buck because whatever they do is not noticeable, and they play dumb and they overconform to delay as much as possible, and sometimes to avoid taking up additional work they depersonalize and provide justification. When you talk about accountability, though it is also part of the culture, defensive behaviors you resort or the people resort in organization is scapegoating, misrepresenting, justification, avoidance of the blame, because the decisions taken, the persons who are accountable are also responsible for the outcomes, and they resort to these. Most of the time the pre-decisions they overconfirm. They prepare as much as documentation as necessary, like doing buffing, and sometimes they play dumb. So this is the problem with some of the defensive behaviors and some of the antecedents which are there in organization. And the most difficult one is ambiguity. I think all of you know that whenever there are no structures, wherever there are no rules, there are no regulations, or no clear-cut instructions, and wherever there are open ends, and in such situations taking decision calls for much better comprehension of the situation, and ambiguity puts off some of the personalities who look for orderliness, a set of instructions, set of boundaries, policy, procedures. In absence of that, they just dump the work, they avoid the action, and they do not take any initiative. On the other side, those who are open to experiment enjoy the ambiguity, the freedom it provides due to lack of rules and regulations, and they thrive and take decisions. So the defensive behaviors you notice from some of them is to avoid action because there are no clear-cut instructions, or they also want to avoid blame in case if the decision goes wrong, and in some cases they plead helplessness with the situation. So if you look at the threat to one's expertise or authority or domain status, which we discussed in module 2, the defensive behaviors you notice is resistance to change. So these are some of the defensive behavior which are part of the organizational cultures and the systems and the characteristics associated with the such a culture. And there is something called burnout or work overload. And most of the members in the organization resort to defensive behaviors of avoiding action, and you need to influence them to accept additional responsibilities, and you need to use different kind of power bases or influence and tactics, which could be reward, coercive, or referent or inspirational, that we would be discussing in module 4, where there is power bases and there are influence tactics by direction. Summary: the key points discussed in this video: understand what is organizational cultures, we did explain. Understand the characteristics of different organizational antecedents. Understand about the impact of organizational culture on one's ability to influence.